G'day guys, Dean here from Blog for the Blood God, and next weekend I'm going to be attending Ratcon 2022, which is a GT held in Ballarat, Victoria, that slightly differs from your traditional tournament format. So they've done some interesting things with the Strike Force missions from the standard Nephilim mission pack, where they've spiced it up a little bit in a very creative way that I think is very valuable and very interesting. So I want to talk about the changes that they've made, some of the creative decisions that they've made, and just some general things about the format in a preview style. And then after the event, I'm going to do a review of the event. I'm going to talk about how these things actually manifested on the tabletop and provide some feedback and those sorts of things. So if you're a tournament organizer, this is going to be interesting for you because you might consider doing something similar for your events coming up. If you're a player, this is something that you might want to weigh in on, and maybe this is something that you could reach out to your tournament organizers and request that they do something similar if you find this interesting. And then also, if you're a player who's attending Ratcon this year, that'll also give you some of my ideas on some of the missions and some of the ways that I think these missions are going to unfold on the tabletop and how they're going to play. So with that all being said, let's get into my preview for Ratcon 2022.
Blog for the Blood God.
Alrighty, so one of the things that Ratcon 2022 is doing that is different than your traditional standard ITC mission format is they are introducing soft scores. So basically this is where you'll have your overall placings and you'll receive a certain amount of points for how well your army is presented and how good of a sport you are on the tabletop. That will combine with your battle scores, your results from your games, to give you an overall score that's going to determine overall placings. Now, it is worth noting that I have confirmed with the TOs that for ITC score purposes, it will be based purely off your battle score. So you're not going to be able to use your painting and stuff like that to get a high ITC score, but it will give you a high score in the tournament itself, which will determine the podium, which will determine prizes and all those sorts of things. So a really interesting way of approaching it straight out the gate. I like the fact that they're making it so that it doesn't impact your ITC scores, because this way your ITC scores are in line with the other events that generate ITC scores. So I think it's really important, if you're going to introduce soft scores, that that doesn't impact the ITC, because then it muddies the water on what exactly a high ITC score means. If most tournaments are doing ITC based off battle, I think it's important that if you incorporate these soft scores, you still continue to have the ITC component exclusively battle. And that's something that Ratcon have done this year. I think it's a very smart move. Now, let's go through some of the soft scores, the way the points are generated, and I'll share some of my thoughts on those now. All right, so first we have Army Selection and Battle Score. So this is 5,500 points, and basically it's your standard, this is your standard victory points. So you get 1,000 points for a win, 500 for a draw, 0 for a loss, and then each battle you get up to 100 points as per the mission pack for a maximum of 500. So there's no real, changes made there. However, the next part, the presentation score, this is where the changes work. Now, your total presentation score is going to be scored out of 1,100 points. So it's equivalent, if you max out your presentation score, it's equivalent to one additional maximum win. So, in order to be used in Ratcon, all models must be painted to a battle-ready standard. During the first round, the TOs will be checking, and during the first round, they will be checking that this is the case for every player. Any models that do not meet this standard will be removed from the table and are not allowed to be used for the rest of the event until they do. So this is slightly different in the way that you don't just lose your 10 battle points for battle ready, you actually get the models removed from the table, so quite harsh penalties for having unpainted models. And then this year they'll be using a greatly simplified scoring system to try to make everybody's lives easier. So armies will be split into 3 categories: the good, the better, and the best, and awarded points based on these, with additional 100 points available for the top 10 armies as judged by the TOs. So good is your standard battle ready, with simple bases, etc. That'll get you 500 points. Better is multiple colors used with a reasonable degree of shading, weathering, and highlighting, in addition to more detailed bases. So this is at 700 points. And then the best is well-executed shading, weathering, highlighting on the majority of the army, in addition to advanced skills such as freehand and color blending. This also includes highly detailed bases. And then there's a page with some examples for people who want to have a better understanding of what scores to expect. All right, so this is the first time I've seen a tournament use this sort of painting style for their soft scores. A lot of tournaments use like a painting rubric where it's like you get X number of points if you have freehand, you get X number of points if you have shading, you get X number of points if you have painted bases. And then it becomes sort of a process of just making sure that your army ticks all those boxes. Whereas what they've done here is a really simplified and I think a very elegant way of doing paint scoring, where it's like, let's just split everybody into 3 camps. Are you painted battle ready? Cool, here's 500 points. You know, are you painted better than average? Like you've got good shading, you've got good cohesiveness across your army, those sorts of things. Well, you get 700 points. Or are you really well painted? Like, are you some of the best? In which case you're going to get 1,000 points. And then they've saved themselves an extra 100 points worth of wiggle room that they can use to reward, you know, those top 10%. I think that's a really good way of doing it. And it also means that you're less likely to have situations where 2 players who have very similarly painted armies are going to get in arguments over, oh, how come he got, you know, 108 points for paint and I only got 102 points, but I think my stuff's better than his. And you get these sort of arguments. And that's one of the traditional problems with soft scores is they're subjective, right? Whereas this takes a lot of that subjectivity out by making it less granular and putting people in those blocks. Your shit's good, your shit's better, and his is the best, right? I think that's a really smart way of doing it. It insulates the TOs from any complaints, and it also means that when you're going into the tournament, you know, I'm either going to get 500, 700, or 1,000. You know, it removes a lot of the, you know, the angst out of it. So I really like this as a method for scoring your victory points for paint. And I also quite like that it's capped at 1,100, because basically what this means is that if you go undefeated, so you're going to get 5,000 points because you're going to get 5 wins, and then you're going to get, you know, say you're going to get, you know, a couple hundred extra points there out of your battle score. So you're going to get, say, 5,400 or something like that. And as long as you meet the basic standard, you're going to get another 500 points on top of that. So you're probably going to end up with a score at around 6,000. It means that if somebody goes 4 wins and a loss, even if they are perfectly painted and absolutely max their paint, they're actually not able to leapfrog you and take the podium and win. So it basically means that if you go undefeated, you are still going to be the champion regardless of your paint. But it means that if that 4 and 1 bracket will be decided by paint. Because if there's multiple people on 4 and 1, but some of them are really well painted and some of them are not well painted, well, the well painted people are going to put themselves on that podium. So I think that's a really clever way of doing it, because it means that you're not going to have situations where somebody goes 4 wins and a loss, but still somehow wins the tournament. You're going to have a defined winner, which is your undefeated player, and then the rest of it will be scrapping based on a combination of your paint scores and your battle scores. So I think that's really well done. Massive credit to the TOs for coming up with a system that does actually work. So I believe it's going to work. I'll let you guys know if there's any challenges that arise on the event, because you never know with these things. And one of my concerns with soft scores is you just never know. There's always those situations that pop up that you're like, I didn't factor that in, because, you know, you're trying to create something new, which is what they've done here. They've created something new. But yeah, I applaud their efforts, and I think they've done a very good job here. All right, so the next part of the soft scores is your sportsmanship score. Now, this is out of 1,000 points, and in this, they say there will be no tick box system for sportsmanship. Instead, each player will start with 1,000 points, and if you feel your opponent played unfairly, cheated, was overly rude, or deliberately took the fun out of the game, then you can go to the TO, explain the situation, and if the TO agrees with your assessment, the opponent will receive a strike. If a player receives 1 strike during the weekend, they lose 200 points and would be ineligible for best sports. If they receive 2 strikes, they will lose 500 points of their sportsmanship score, and the TO will personally inform them of their behavior. And if you receive 3 strikes over the course of the weekend, you will lose all 1,000 of their sportsmanship points, and then depending on the severity, they may also be disqualified, and any prizes may be removed from the event if necessary. There'll also be a best sports vote at the conclusion of Game 5 to determine the best sports award. And remember that a lot of players traveled quite far for this event, so make sure that you make the games enjoyable, etc. Again, huge credit to the TOs for coming up with a really interesting way of doing sports scores. So sportsmanship scoring, for those who haven't been to an event that uses it, it comes in various different shapes and sizes. One of the most common ones that have existed throughout the past was that at the end of the game you get a sheet with tick boxes on it, and you write your opponent's name at the top, and it'll be like, did they roll all of their dice clearly? Yes or no, you know? Were they clear with all of their measurements? Yes or no? Basically, you just give them all these tick boxes, and then that generates a score that goes towards their overall placings. And the problem with that system is a lot of people will do what we call sports sniping, which is basically your opponent might have just done one thing wrong that's just triggered you for some reason, or you might have personal history with them, or, you know, the infinite number of reasons. So what people were known to do was just say, no, they didn't this, no, they didn't that, no, they didn't that, when in reality they did do those things. So they probably did roll all of their dice clearly, but because they don't like that person, they're just like, no, fuck them, right? And there was no real protection against that. So with this system where it's like, well, if you have a problem, you have to go speak to a TO about it, and then the TO will determine whether or not it's a valid claim, and then they'll also let that player know there's been a strike against you because of this stuff, blah, blah, blah. I think that's really, really clever way of doing it because it involves the TO, so the TO can stop people from just penalizing somebody for being salty, you know? Like if you go up and you're like, oh, he was just a fucking cunt. It's like, well, what did he do? Oh, he was just being a fucking, like, well, what did he do? If you can't tell me what he did, then he's not getting a penalty, you know? So it allows the TO to interject and prevent those sort of sports sniping situations. And it forces the TOs to be aware of these things as well, because the other problem with the tick box system is you fill out your sports score and you put it in the box and the TO tallies it up at the end. But it's like, if this person's doing something wrong, you should be notifying the TO. You know, there should be a way of encouraging that communication between players and TOs. And I think this sportsmanship system does a very good job of that. So again, credit to the TOs. This is an amazing system. I think they've done a good job. Next up is the missions. Now, with Ratcon 2022, they've done something really interesting where they've taken the standard missions from the Nephilim pack, and what they've done is they've just tweaked the sub-primary. So all of the secondary objectives are the same, all of the primary objectives are the same, the deployment maps are all the same, the objective placement is all the same. So it feels very much like a normal ITC tournament, right? Everything is the same. The only thing that they've changed is that sub-primary, the mission-specific primary. So they've changed those and they've basically created a few different fun, interesting sub-primaries that are all rat themed. So they're all sort of themed around Skaven and that sort of theme, which is the theme of the event. Now this, I think, is a really cool way of doing it because it basically means if you want to just play the game, you can play your standard primary, you just go for that, and your standard suite of secondaries that you would take at any ITC tournament. And you can just play and you can still get your 100, you can still do everything you would normally do. It's just that mission-specific sub-primary that, let's be honest, most people forget about anyway, you know, or it's something that's a sort of an afterthought. And it's also something that's often not that impactful because you're often going to be both maxing your primary these days. So, you know, it's relatively easy to max your primary. So whether or not the mission-specific sub-primary is any good or not is kind of irrelevant. So they've done some interesting stuff here with that sub-primary. Some of these I'm a big fan of. Some of them I don't really like because they actually impact the game in some significant ways. So let's go through these missions one at a time and that'll round out the video. So we'll start with the first mission. All right, mission 1 is called Eat, Pray, Mutate. So in this mission, character units from your army can perform the Consume Warpstone action. And basically, if any character unit from your army can start this action at the end of your movement phase, and it's completed at the end of your shooting phase. You can only attempt this action while you're in control range of an objective marker, and each character can only complete actions on each individual objective once. If they wish to perform it again, they must do it on a different objective. If this objective is completed, if this action is completed, it should say there, the character that completed the action must roll on one of the tables on the following page, depending on how many wounds they began the game with, and immediately apply the effect. In addition, if you successfully complete Consume Warpstone action, you immediately gain 1 command point. This can be gained in addition to Battleforge CP bonuses, and does not count towards your regenerated CP per battle round. Then you've got standard take and hold, so control 1, control 2, control more. And the progressive objective is if a character unit from your army completes the Consume Warpstone action this turn, score 3 victory points for a maximum of 15 per player. And then the table that you roll on is if you started the game with 0 to 9 wounds, you basically roll a d6. On a 1, you suffer d3 mortal wounds or inflict d6 mortal wounds on the nearest unit, friend or foe. On a 2 to 3, you add 1 to the armor save characteristic of the model for the rest of the battle to a maximum of 2+. On a 4 to 5, each ranged attack or melee attack suffers a -1 to its hit roll when targeting the character for the rest of the battle. And on a 6, the character gains +1 to their strength and toughness and attacks characteristics for the rest of the battle. So they're all pretty cool. And then the mutated chonkers, which is if you start with 10 or more wounds, on a 1, you immediately suffer 2d3 mortal wounds. On a 2 to 3, for the rest of the game, ranged or melee attacks made by this character improve their AP by 1. On a 4 to 5, for the rest of the battle, improve the movement, toughness values of the character by 1. And on a 6, you get both of the above, the O Lord and the He Comin'. So you basically get +1 AP, +1 movement, +1 toughness. And also, in addition, if the character has an ability on their datasheet that triggers on death, there is no need to roll for it, it triggers automatically. All right, this is a relatively cool and simple objective. So basically, as your sub-primary, your characters can do an action on an objective. It completes at the end of your shooting phase, which is interesting. It basically means that your characters can move up, do the action, and still charge things because it's completed your shooting phase. And then basically you get a bunch of random buffs based on, you know, what characters you have. The one where it's things that trigger on a death automatically trigger is quite interesting on characters that have like a fight on death or a get back up on death, you know, those sorts of things. It's quite interesting. But most of these are relatively mild as far as I'm concerned. I look forward to doing this with Abaddon and trying to get for that +1 toughness. That could be kind of interesting. But ultimately, I don't think any of these are particularly game-breaking. I think they're quite interesting and subtle enough, and it's just a really cool, fun one. I like this mission. I think it's going to be a ton of fun. Let's get into mission 2. All right, mission 2 is called the Battalion Job. So in this one, units with a pre-battle rule that allows it to set up anywhere on the battlefield that cannot be set up in no man's land. If the rule allows it to make a move before the turn begins, it cannot end the move in no man's land. And if it redeploys, it cannot be set up in no man's land. Then there's a heist action. At the end of your movement phase, a friendly model excluding aircraft within control range of an uncontested objective marker may attempt to steal it. This action is completed at the start of your shooting phase. If completed, roll 1d6 and on a result of a 3+, the objective is successfully picked up. The objective marker moves with the model, measuring all distances to the marker, for the marker, to the model that holds it. The following rules apply to any unit holding an objective once they have picked it up. The unit controls the objective marker whilst it's in possession of it, regardless of a model count or objective secured. Each unit can only hold one objective in this manner. The unit carrying the objective may only move 6 inches per phase. You can perform an action on the objective that is being held by a model as long as you are within the required range of the action measured to the center of the model. The unit carrying the objective cannot redeploy or move into strategic reserves by any means. The unit carrying the objective cannot embark on transport or any vehicle. The unit carrying the objective is killed. Place the objective on the battlefield with the center of the objective as close as possible to the center of that model. And then it's a domination, so this is a hold 3, a hold 2, hold 3, hold more. And then you've got the end game objective, which is split the table into 2 halves diagonally along the same line that the objective markers were placed on at the start of the game. For every objective marker that started in no man's land that is now in your board half, score 4 victory points. In addition, if the objective began the game in your opponent's deployment zone and is no longer in there, score 5 victory points. So it doesn't specify when this is scored for every objective marker that started in that. So I assume it's command phase, but it's interesting. It doesn't actually specify when that's scored. All right, so that's quite an interesting objective. So basically there's going to be all the objective markers lined up diagonally. You basically go out, you do an action to pick it up, and then you can move backwards with it into your own deployment zone and then score victory points. And you get to score it for each one. So that's pretty cool. But yeah, it's interesting. I'll have to get the TOs to clarify when that 4 points that you get is scored. Is it it's a command phase? Is it the end of your turn? Is it, you know, I assume it's going to be command phase, but I'll have to get clarification on that. And I'll put it in the comments of this video when I get that clarification. So yeah, with that being said, let's jump into the third mission. All right, lock, stock, and 2 smoking rats. So with this one, you've got a mission special rule called tunneling mad rats. Units can be placed into strategic reserves using the modified CP costs below. This cannot be changed by any army rules or abilities that allow you to reduce strategic reserves costs. Any units arriving from strategic reserves must roll on the warp grinder table on the following page. In addition to this, if set up in the 3rd battle round, your units that arrive from strategic reserves do not need to come in within 6 inches of the board edge and can be set up anywhere on the battlefield following the normal restrictions for your warp grinder result. So your strategic reserves costs is basically up to 19 power level you can do for free, and from 20 to 29 it's 1, from 30 to 39 is 2, from 40 to 49 is 3, etc. And then basically they're take and hold, so it's hold 1, hold 2, hold more. And then the progressive objective is at the end of the player turn, for each friendly unit that's wholly within your enemy territory, score 1 victory point. For each friendly unit that's wholly within the enemy deployment zone, score 2 victory points. And these points can only be scored by units that arrived from strategic reserves at any point during this battle. And then there's a little chart here for your warp grinder table. So basically you're going to roll this. It doesn't specify when you roll on that. I'm assuming it's when you declare that you are bringing them in. So say you've got a unit of cultists and you're like, yep, cool, they're coming in from warp grind. I guess you would roll it then. Okay, so if you roll a 1, you roll a d6 for each model in the unit. For every result of a 3+, the unit suffers a mortal wound. On a 2 to 3, should have taken the left. Units must deploy further than 18 inches from an enemy unit. If this is unable to deploy, place the unit back into strategic reserves and roll again next turn. 4 to 5 is all is fine and the unit sets up as normal. And on a 6, is right on top of them. There is no range restrictions for where this unit can be placed. All right, so this mission I'm not 100% sold on. So I think it's interesting and I think it's a cool concept. I think first of all, they need to clarify when you do that roll, because that's kind of important, right? Like if you roll and it's like, oh, you can't be placed further than 18, well, maybe you don't want to bring them in then. So do you roll before deciding to bring them in? Do you roll at deciding? Do you roll when you place them in strategic reserves? Does your opponent have knowledge of the, you know, when this timing happens? There's a few things that'll need to be clarified there. And then also, I'm not a huge fan of the wild variability of it, because you've got, you know, if you roll that 6 and get to come in with no restrictions on where you can place the models, well, that's insane. You place them into combat so people don't get to overwatch. You get to do like some really janky stuff. You place them, sandbag the absolute fuck out of people. You can wrap around objectives. You can place them within engagement range of people to get the characters that you would otherwise have to try. Like, it's just really crazy, like if you do roll that 6. But it's also horrible if you roll anything less than a 4, because you've got to be, you know, further than 18 away from the enemy, which is just ridiculous. So I like what they're trying to do here, and I think it's interesting, but I'm not a huge fan of the extremes of that swing. You know, what I would have liked to have seen is something like, you know, maybe if you roll a 1, 2, or a 3, you have to set up 10 inches away instead of 9. You know, so it's not a disaster. It just sort of sucks a little bit. And then on a 6, instead of being able to set up just anywhere, maybe it can be set up 8 inches. You know, or they could have even made it a little bit more granular and gone, cool, like if you roll a 1, you have to be set up, you know, 12 inches away. 2 is, you know, 8 inch, or say 10 inches away. 3 is 9 inches away. You know, 4 is set 8 inches away, something like that. You know what I mean? Like slowly slide it so that you've got a little bit more variability in there, but it's not as disastrous and it's not as wildly swingy, because at best you're going to get like a 6 inch and at worst you're going to get say a 10 inch, you know, if you make it that sort of range. And I would also recommend in these sorts of things, you want to have, if it's a D6, you want to have like a 3 and a 4 are nothing, you know, just standard. And then a 1 or a 2 are bad, and a 5 or a 6 are good. And that way, often, this actually won't have any significant impact on the game. And I think that's what you want when you're trying to create something custom. You want it to be mild and relatively unnoticed, but interesting. So I think that's a delicate balance, and I think they've just missed the mark on this one. But I still think it's very creative, and I like the idea and the concept around the mission. So yeah, all in all, cool, but I think it could be tweaked a bit. Let's get into the 4th mission. All right, Demolition Rat. So this mission has a special rule called Expendable. Your units may voluntarily target ranged attacks at enemy units engaged in combat with your infantry units. All successful hits must be randomized between fighting units. For example, a 1 to 3 hits a friendly unit, 4 to 6 hits an enemy unit. In addition, your character units cannot perform a heroic intervention into combat involving your infantry units. Then we have take and hold primary, so it's hold 1, hold 2, hold more. And then there's a special mission secondary, which is at the end of each player's turn, if you completed 1 or more shooting attacks using the expendable mission rule, score 3 victory points. All right, so once again, I think we've got a couple of little things that could have been done better with the wording. For example, they say engaged in combat. What does that mean, right? It's pretty obvious that it means if there are enemy units within engagement range of friendly units, right? Because that's what being engaged in combat means. But technically, that engaged in combat, that's not a rule. There's no wording for so I think they could tighten up their language a little bit and use the correct terms for the rules, but we all know what they're doing here. We know what the purpose of this rule is, right? I think it's interesting being able to shoot into combat. It's one of those things where it punishes armies that don't take infantry, because in order to get the 3 victory points, you need to be able to shoot into combat with an infantry unit. So if you're all knights, you actually just can't achieve this. And also, you can't heroically intervene into one where there's infantry. So it's a little bit of an interesting one where it's like, do you want infantry because you want to get those victory points, or do you not because you can't heroically intervene into something if there's already infantry in there? So interesting mission. I think this one's probably one of the most subtle in the way that most people are probably just going to ignore it, because you often aren't going to still be in combat in the subsequent turns to be able to shoot into the combat. And even if you were, you probably don't want to shoot into that combat. You probably want to fall back out of that combat and then just blast the thing that you were in combat with, right? So it's cute, and I think it's cool, and I think it's a fun little idea, but I don't think this is going to have any particular impact on the game, which overall I think is actually a good thing, and it's a mark in the pros for this. So yeah, good job on this one, and let's talk about Mission 5. All right, so Mission 5, this is the one that you'll be playing off for the win. This is the top table, end of the event. This is what they're going to be playing. So it's called the Good, the Rat, and the Ugly. So basically, the mission special rule is your forces have been joined by a cunning assassin trained in 100 ways to track and kill their target. The rules for the assassin are located on the following page. The assassin does not break any detachment abilities, army-wide rules for your faction. However, they do not benefit from them, any codex-specific stratagems or anything like that. And your assassin can use the universal stratagems in the core rulebook, however. And he has a special rule called Hidden. Instead of deploying your assassin as a normal unit, instead, secretly note a friendly unit in your army. The assassin is hidden inside that unit. If the unit is destroyed before the assassin is revealed, the assassin is destroyed as well. The assassin may be revealed at the start of any of your movement phase or any fight phase. When revealed, the assassin is placed in coherency with the unit and can then move, shoot, and fight as normal. The assassin can only be placed in engagement range of enemy units if it is deployed in the fight phase. This counts as a heroic intervention for game purposes. Okay, then you got your take and hold, so it's hold 1, hold 2, hold more. And you've got the special mission objective is called You've Yeed Your Last Whore. For every character model your assassin kills, gain 3 victory points. If it was your opponent's warlords, gain 5 victory points. If it was the opposing assassin, score 10 victory points for a maximum of 15 points per player. And then we've got a little bit of a data sheet here for the assassin. So he's got an 8-inch move, weapon skill, ballistic skill 2+, strength and toughness 3, 4 wounds, 6 attacks, and a 4+ save. And his weapons are, he's got a pistol, which is 18-inch range, pistol 2, Strength 6, AP 3, 1 damage. He gets to ignore the lookout, sir, and in addition, whenever you roll an unmodified 6 to wound, you inflict 1 mortal wound in addition to other damage. And then he's got a blade, which is strength, going to be strength 5, because it's +2. It's -3, D3 damage. And he's got a couple special rules. If your assassin can target an enemy assassin with ranged attacks, which it must do with all available weapons, it must also end its move closer to the enemy assassin and charge it if possible. So if your assassin can target their assassin, you must do it, and you must end closer. That's interesting. So if you reveal your assassin early, when your opponent reveals theirs, they have to head towards you. That's interesting. And then the assassin has a 5+ invulnerable save. He cannot be targeted with ranged attacks unless by an enemy unit within 12 inches. And Gunslinger, each time he makes a ranged attack, if a hit is scored, it can make an additional attack roll against the same target. This roll may not trigger additional attack rolls. Okay, so it's an interesting one that they've picked for the final round. I would say the final round is the one where you want to make sure that it's the least janky and least weird, because that's going to be the most tense game between the top 2 undefeated players going off for the win. So you want to have the most balanced mission for that final round. Although I can also see an argument for having the most fun mission, because the other 90% of the field are just blowing off steam and they want to end it with a bang. So I could see an argument for both. I personally would be running the more serious mission for this one, and I think this is probably not the right mission choice for that final round. That being said, I know that Ratcon, what they like to do, and they do this every year, is they'll actually give every player a model. So you'll actually receive a little model that'll be a painted little rat assassin, and you'll get to take that home with you as part of your collection now, and they'll give that to you in that last round so that you can use it in the game. So I understand why they're doing this as the last mission, and that's fine. I wouldn't have done it this way, but I totally understand it. Now, there's a few things that I think probably could use some clarifications. One of them is, like, for example, the assassin has to move towards the nearest, like, towards the other assassin, right? But how do they interact with that if charges? Can he move towards your assassin but then charge to get back where he was, or does he have to charge in that direction? And what about things like if he's, blocked by something, right, and he can't move in that direction, does he have to move? Does he have to move as close as he can? There's a few things that could probably be clarified with that. I think most people understand the intent and it probably won't be an issue, but it's a little bit clunky. And I also think that the rules for this rat are quite underwhelming, which is good in the way that you don't want every player to just get this epic assassin in their army that's amazing and is super powerful, because that could throw out game balance and things like that. So they've done a good job in keeping it subtle. That being said, if your mission objective is to kill things with this assassin and he's running around with a single damage strength, whatever, pistol, and a sword that's doing D3 damage, and he's got to try and kill characters. He's not killing characters, unless your opponent's running some piss weak characters. But realistically, I'm looking at my Chaos Space Marine list and I'm like, this assassin's not killing any of my characters. If he comes anywhere near my characters, I'm going to splat the rat. So yeah, I think it's interesting and it's a janky little fun one. I think more or less people are going to ignore this and they're just going to try and max their primary, and maybe they'll try and leverage it so that their assassin kills the other assassin. That's one way that it can be done quite well, because if you do that, not only are you killing their assassin, therefore denying them the ability to score points, but you're also scoring the big 15 points for killing their assassin. So that's an interesting sort of dynamic, and their assassin is kind of weak. He's only toughness 3 with a couple wounds. Your assassin probably actually can kill their assassin. So I think that's where most people are going to try and take this. They're going to go, okay, cool, I'm going to have my assassin hidden. I'm going to wait for your assassin to come out. And then when your assassin comes out, I'm going to send mine into yours and try and kill you that way. So that'll be interesting. And it'll be interesting to see the way that people try and protect their assassin. Those sorts of things could be an interesting one. But ultimately, I think this was probably a little bit of a miss. I would have liked to have seen a bit more of an impactful character. Make the assassin an actual assassin, something that actually is going to threaten your opponent. That being said, they don't want to go too far with it, so I respect what they've done here. I wouldn't criticize this too much. I think they've done a great job. All right, so that rounds out the 5 different missions that we're going to be playing at Ratcon 2022. So as you can see, most of them are relatively subtle. Most of them aren't going to blow out the game and change things for the, make it like that. Previous years they've had things where like you could blow up objective markers and remove them from the table and things like that, which are really big swings. So they've really have done a great job of toning it down. They've done a great job of the soft scores. I think, as much as I personally don't like soft scores in tournaments because I think they bring more problems than they solve, I respect that some people like them, and I really respect the way Ratcon have included them. I think they've done probably the best job at soft scores that I've ever seen at a tournament. And these missions, I think they've done the best job of custom missions, because most of these missions are going to be relatively subtle. They're going to fly under the radar. And also, they've maintained the standard secondaries. They've maintained the standard primary. All they've done is they've got all the deployments are standard deployments. They've just tweaked that sub-primary that most people ignore anyway. So all in all, very, very cool, very good. And I'm looking forward to this event. I'm still yet to decide what list I'm going to run, because I've got like fucking 6 different Chaos lists of all different legions that I love. Every time I review a different Chaos Legion, I'm like, this legion's amazing, I love it. So I'm yet to decide which one I want to actually bring to this event. I'll probably bring either something highly experimental, because it's a silly event with soft scores and people will be, you know, fucking around with these specific mission objectives and stuff. So people aren't going to take this event particularly serious. So I'll either bring something highly experimental, or I'll bring my World Eaters, because of my collection, my World Eaters are the best painted, so they'll help me get those paint points, and that's also sort of in spirit with the event, because the whole idea of this event is that they want to encourage well-presented models, they want to encourage that high paint standard and those sorts of things. So it'll either be the World Eaters, or it'll be something highly experimental, where I'll be doing something really weird and different, and I'll bring, you know, some crazy stuff. So yeah, one of those two things. So let me know what you guys think of this, and if you want to see me review more tournament style content like this, where there's the weird and different tournaments and I'll share my thoughts on them and those sorts of things, let me know. I've done this in the past for tournaments and I've got relatively good success with these videos. I've got a lot of engagement with you guys in the comments below, which is primarily what I do this for. I really enjoy the conversations we have down there. So let me know if you enjoyed this video. And yeah, I'll let you know how I go, and then I'll get straight back into the Chaos Masterclass series. I've got some more content coming out for some of the different legions. I've got a sick Night Lords video coming up. They've got some really cool tricks that they can do. So yeah, I'll hit you guys with those soon. And yeah, enjoy your weekend, and I'll see you soon.
Look for the Blood God.
Do your objective markers ever get lost behind terrain or other models and become difficult to see? Do they ever get bumped and accidentally moved during a game? And do they ever spark arguments about distances? Well, not anymore. Introducing the blog for the Blood God, not even remotely patented neoprene objective markers. Made from the same material as astronaut suits, or maybe military equipment, or probably neither of those things, this 2mm thick neoprene synthetic rubber is tear resistant, water resistant, and is designed to last. But that's not all. The blog for the Blood God, not even remotely patented neoprene objective markers come in a variety of different designs and styles to suit any faction represented in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. These objective markers are a perfect gift for yourself or a friend, and are a perfect way to flex and show your opponent that not only are you a smarter, cooler, and better 40k player than them, but you also have more disposable income than they do. For the low price of $25, you'll get not 1, not 2, but 6 neoprene objective markers, perfectly designed for 9th edition Warhammer 40k. But wait, there's more. For a limited time only, people who sign up on Patreon to support Blog for the Blood God as a Skull Champion tier $5 per month member will gain access to a custom design service where I will design a unique logo to support their gaming club, like the one I did to the left here for the Potato Farmers local gaming club here in Melbourne. Follow the links in the description of this video to pick up your set today.